Hey, this is Popular Culture Kid KJ, the American boy living in Canada. Bombshell! Prime Minister Stephen Harper has called election. Today is Sunday, September the 7th, 2008, 8:15 a.m.
Public service, I think that in general this government has been well served by the public service, and I have no complaints about the public service. They work hard to help the government and improve the management of the federal administration. As for the left, as you know, I just named a new judge for the Supreme Court. It's an excellent candidate. I hope that we will have the support of the opposition parties to Judge Cromwell. As for the Senate, obviously the Senate remains a big problem for our democracy, and this party hopes to reform or abolish, if necessary, the Senate. But until now, in this minority government, it's not possible.
Good morning, Prime Minister. In an interview with CTV's Lloyd Robertson yesterday, you predicted that this campaign is going to get very personal and very nasty in terms of attacks on you. Wondering if you could expand on that, tell us why you think that is, and also, would you then commit that you are not going to go personal and nasty against the other leaders?
No, I don't see any reason to go personal and nasty against the other leaders. I have good relations with most of the other leaders, and I respect all of them as individuals and as political adversaries. We disagree. I think we have lots of scope in this election to go after the positions these leaders have taken. And you know, I think in particular our principal opposition, the Liberal Party, is running on a policy, a tax increase, a carbon tax, it doesn't want to talk about it. So I think that's why they're going to spend their time attacking us and attacking me personally. And certainly that's been the tenor of the last few months in Parliament, so that's what I expect we'll have more of.
On va continuer avec Tamara Alteresco, Radio-Canada Radio.
Ça fait 2 ans que vous vous battez contre une opposition qui est relativement faible et on voit... Ça fait 2 ans que vous vous battez contre une opposition qui est relativement faible.
It's been 2 years. You've been fighting a relatively weak opposition, and we see that people, 2 years later, still have doubts on your ability to form a majority government. We're talking about fear, but also doubt. How do you explain the doubts people have regarding you? You have the intention to inverse this view. Answer: yes, I note that my leadership is well received by the population, according to public information, but we have 4 parties, 4 political parties with solid electoral bases, and I say that in such a situation, it's difficult for any party to hold a majority position. And I think that the mathematics of this situation, for the weakness of the opposition, I'd like to mention that it's important to remind ourselves that the position, according to the number of seats, the position of it's one of the weakest minorities in history, but despite that, we've managed to succeed to lead this government for 2.5 years, and I think that this indicates that minority parliament could function, as I said yesterday, if this government is able to gain even a second minority a second time. I think that that positions us in a very strong position towards the next parliament.
The United States has taken control of, the United States government has taken control of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac this morning. How concerned are you that mortgage instability could spread to Canada? And since we're near the bottom of the list, can you also explain why you feel Parliament is dysfunctional in light of all the accomplishments you've listed?
Well, first of all, let me address the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac question. the United States government has effectively underwritten these two agencies for a long period of time. And whether one agrees with this or not, I think this is probably the inevitable consequence of that policy. We don't have a similar policy in Canada. In Canada, the financial positions of our governments, of our financial institutions, and of our household sectors are very strong. Obviously, we are concerned about economic weakness in our export markets. We've seen some slowing of our economy as a consequence, and that's something that we have to manage as a government. But the fundamentals of the Canadian economy in those respects are strong. While we see some slowing of the housing market, I don't think we're going to see any kind of mortgage crisis like we have in the United States. So I'm confident in that regard. You know, I think I've said before, look, this is not, nobody can accuse us of being a snap election. I don't think a Prime Minister has ever, for so many weeks in advance, telegraphed the possible date of an election and asked the opposition parties, or looked for the opposition parties to provide any hint of support. And they were all very clear. They don't intend to support the government. This Parliament is at its useful end. If you want me to give a concrete example of that, let me give you just one from the last couple of days. And that is my nomination of Justice Thomas Cromwell to serve on the Supreme Court. As you know, constitutionally, this is a decision that rests entirely with the government, with the Prime Minister. But I actually gave the opposition parties a voice in that process. We set up an ad hoc committee where they could review nominees and suggest their preferred candidates. And all they did was, first of all, spent the first meeting in 6 hours of procedural wrangling, and then scuttled all subsequent meetings. You know, even when you give the opposition power, they fight the government. So, you know, as I say, regardless of what, and I said several weeks ago, regardless of what the polls are, and the polls are all over the map, the frank reality is this Parliament is at its useful end, and Canadians have to give somebody a mandate. The opposition doesn't want to support us, and the government does not want to change direction. That's an impasse, and the public should decide. And you all know, you who are around Ottawa know that that is the situation we're in.
On continue avec Hugo de Grandpré, La Presse.
Monsieur le Premier ministre, vous avez adopté votre loi sur les élections.
When you made your law on fixed elections, you said that this would help prevent politicians from calling elections for their own political agendas. Can you affirm that despite all this, that you're calling for elections now, it's not dictated, at least in part, by the political opportunism? As I've just said, I gave the opposition party several weeks of warning, several weeks to indicate the possibility to support the government, and the opposition parties no longer want to support, not at all, the government. And that's the reality of this government. It's not in the interest of the population to continue a parliament where the government or the opposition cannot reach an agreement on any subject. And this is the reality. It's not in the public interest to continue a parliament where the government and the opposition can no longer reach a consensus on any subject. Is the reality. As for polls, for the past 2 weeks, the polls indicated that several results that were leading several points. In other polls, we're neck and neck with the Liberals, and even in this poll, the Liberals are in the lead. And I think that I'm taking this decision with a lot of warning for the simple reality that the population must decide who has the mandate, the government or the opposition. The population must decide who should be leading the country and in which direction.
Prime Minister,